Step out of the car. Now. Officer Richards' voice was sharp, almost barking, his hand hovering dangerously close to his holstered weapon. His face was tight, anger and nerves clashing in his expression. He was tense, more aggressive than the situation called for, towering over the petite woman in the driver's seat of a sleek black SUV. The woman, calm but visibly annoyed, raised a perfectly arched brow. "And why exactly am I stepping out of the car?" Her voice was firm, unwavering. Richard scowled, his fingers tightening around his belt. "Don't make me repeat myself. Step out. Now." With deliberate ease, the woman pushed open the door, stepping out with the confidence of someone who was not used to being ordered around. Her tailored suit, the polished way she carried herself, it all clashed with the officer's preconceived notions. Folding her arms, she met his glare head-on, like she was the one in charge. "License and registration don't match the description of this vehicle," Richard snapped, eyes narrowing. "This car's too nice. Looks stolen to me." She tilted her head slightly, steadying him. "I assume you've already run my plates then?" A beat of silence. Richards didn't answer. Instead, he barked, "Turn around and place your hands on the car." She didn't move. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket. Richard's hand shot to his gun. "Don't move another inch," he yelled. She froze, then slowly, deliberately, pulled out a badge, holding it up for him to see. "You might want to rethink your tone. I'm Special Agent Kendra Mills, Head of Internal Affairs. And you, Officer Richards, are about 2 seconds away from being reported for misconduct." Richards went pale. His hand dropped from his weapon as the weight of her words sank in. "Wait, what?" he stammered. Kendra's expression didn't waver. "Did you just racially profile me?" Richards opened his mouth, but no words came out. Kendra took a step closer, her voice cutting like glass. "Explain yourself, officer. Right now." A second squad car pulled up, the crunch of tires on pavement slicing through the thick tension. The door slammed. Another officer stepped out. Kendra didn't even glance his way. She kept her eyes locked on Richards, waiting. Hours earlier, Kendra Mills was wrapping up a tense meeting at the Internal Affairs office in downtown Chicago. As head of the department, she had seen more corruption cases than she cared to count. Today was no different. Complaints about excessive force were stacking up, and the conversation about next steps had been heated. She needed a break. A rare moment outside the office. Sliding into her SUV, she eyed the stack of case files on the passenger seat, but pushed them aside. Right now, the only thing on her mind was fried chicken from her favorite spot across town. She turned up the jazz station, letting the music smooth out her nerves as she drove. She had no idea trouble was waiting just a few blocks away. As she cruised through a suburban neighborhood, she noticed a squad car parked on the side of the road. A glance from the officer inside. Then, as she passed, the car pulled out behind her. She didn't think much of it. Not at first. Then the lights flashed. Sighing, she slowed to a stop, already suspecting what this was about. Her fingers brushed over her ID badge, just in case. Officer Richards approached with an air of arrogance, tapping aggressively on her window. "License and registration." She handed them over without a word, watching as he scanned them. His frown deepened. "This doesn't add up." Kendra exhaled slowly. "Excuse me? What exactly isn't adding up?" Richards leaned in closer. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to you." A long pause. Kendra's jaw tightened. "And what exactly does a car like this belong to?" He ignored the question. "Step out of the car." And that's when she knew this wasn't a routine stop. As she stepped out, his condescending tone scraped against her patience, the insinuation sharp and obvious. She had dealt with men like Richards before. The ones who saw power as a weapon rather than a responsibility. But this time, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Now, standing face to face, Kendra didn't flinch. "I'm waiting for an answer, officer." Richards blinked rapidly, sweat gathering on his forehead. It's just standard procedure." She raised her badge higher. "This isn't standard. This is profiling. And unless you want me to call your captain right now, you better start explaining yourself." Before Richards could stutter out a response, the second officer, Sergeant Harris, stepped forward. Kendra recognized him immediately. She'd seen his name in investigation files. "What's going on here?" Harris asked, looking between them. Richards shifted uncomfortably. I pulled her over because..." "Because what?" Kendra cut in. "Because my skin color doesn't match the car I'm driving?" Harris's expression hardened as recognition dawned. "Agent Mills." "That's right." She folded her arms. "And unless Officer Richards has a real reason for pulling me over, I'm going to assume this is harassment." Harris shot Richards the sharp look. "Is that true?" Richards swallowed hard. I thought she..." And just like that, his excuses crumbled. "Thought wrong," Harris snapped. "Apologize. Now." Richards hesitated, his face burning with humiliation. His jaw clenched, but before he could mutter a word, Kendra's eyes narrowed. "I don't want an apology. I want accountability." She turned to Harris. "Sergeant, I suggest you take your officer aside before this gets even worse for him." Harris didn't need to be told twice. His sharp gaze locked onto Richards, his voice low and firm. "Officer Richards. My office. Now." Richards froze. His face twisted between defiance and fear, his hand twitching as if he wanted to defend himself. But one look at Harris made it clear, there would be no excuses today. Slowly, he turned, walking toward his squad car, shoulders hunched, head low. Harris stayed behind, turning to Kendra. "I apologize for this, Agent Mills," he said, his voice measured. "I'll handle it personally." Kendra folded her arms. "This isn't the first complaint I've heard about Richards. And I doubt it'll be the last. You might want to think long and hard about how your precinct handles officers like him." Harris nodded, but there was something in his expression, a flicker of unease. "I understand." Before Kendra could respond, the static crackle of a police radio cut through the tense air. Harris reached for his shoulder mic, listening intently. His posture stiffened. He shot a glance at Richards, who was now in his squad car, engine running. "Stay here," Harris instructed before jogging over to Richards' window. Their conversation was hushed, but the tension was undeniable. Richards' face darkened. Harris gestured sharply. A second later, Richards threw the car into gear and sped off, his lights still flashing. Kendra's eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" Harris turned back, his voice neutral. "An incident nearby." Kendra crossed her arms. "And you're letting him respond to a call? After what just happened? Are you serious?" Harris hesitated. "It's a minor situation. I'll be following up with him after this." She didn't buy it. Not for a second. "If Richards escalates another situation today, that's on you." Harris looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he sighed and motioned toward her car. "You're free to go. Again, I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Kendra didn't move. She studied him carefully, instincts buzzing. Something wasn't adding up. "No, I'm not done here," she said coolly. "I'd like to know what that call was about." Harris's jaw tightened. "It's routine. Nothing you need to worry about." Her eyes didn't waver. "Sergeant, I think you forget who you're talking to. I'm not just some civilian." "I'll ask again, what was that call about?" Harris glanced at his watch, exhaling sharply. "A disturbance at a nearby park. Richards was closest, so I sent him." Kendra filed that information away. "Fine. But don't think for a second this ends here. She got into her car and shut the door firmly. As she pulled away, her mind raced. She wasn't about to let Richards off the hook, and Harris's reluctance to rein him in only made her more suspicious. A decision settled in her gut. She was going to the park. The park was a quiet neighborhood spot, a playground, a few benches, a basketball court. But as soon as Kendra pulled in, she spotted Richard's squad car parked haphazardly near the entrance. And then she saw him. Richard stood near the basketball court, looming over a group of teenagers, mostly black and Hispanic. His posture was aggressive, one hand on his hip, the other jabbing in their direction. The kids looked tense, their backs stiff, their voices raised in frustration. Kendra parked, stepping out of her SUV. She watched for a moment. A tall boy in a red hoodie stood his ground, his voice defiant. Richards moved closer, his stance menacing. Kendra knew exactly where this was headed. "Hey!" Kendra called out, striding toward them. "What's going on here?" Richards turned sharply, his face hardening when he saw her. "This doesn't concern you." Kendra stopped just a few feet away. "Oh, I think it does." The teenagers exchanged wary glances, unsure who she was. But Richards knew. And he didn't like it. "Agent Mills," he gritted out. "I'm handling a situation here. I suggest you leave." "Handling it," she repeated, her voice edged with disbelief. "By yelling at kids? What's the problem?" Richards jabbed a finger toward the boy in the hoodie. This one was causing a disturbance. Playing loud music. Harassing park visitors. The boy scoffed. "That's a lie." He turned to Kendra, frustration all over his face. "We were just playing basketball." He rolled up and started yelling at us for no reason. Richard's face darkened. "Don't interrupt me." "Enough." Kendra's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped between Richards and the teens, her gaze locking onto the boys. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said, his defiance flickering into uncertainty. "Marcus, were you causing trouble?" Her voice was calm but firm. "No, ma'am." He shook his head. "We were just hanging out." He came over and started accusing us of stuff. Kendra turned to the other teens. "Is that true?" A chorus of "yeah," and "we didn't do anything" followed. She looked back at Richards. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. And just like that, Kendra knew. This wasn't about a disturbance. This was about power. And Richards was using it exactly the way she suspected he always did. And now? Now, she was here to stop it. Kendra's expression sharpened. "Sounds like you don't have much of a case here." Richard's jaw tightened. "I was responding to a complaint." Kendra wasn't letting him off that easy. "From who? Where's the complainant?" Richards hesitated, glancing around the park like the answer might suddenly appear. "They must have left." Kendra arched a brow. "How convenient." Her voice was dry, laced with disbelief. "So let's recap. No witnesses, no evidence, and yet here you are, intimidating kids. That sound like proper procedure to you?" Richard's face turned red, but he stayed silent. Kendra turned to Marcus and the others. "Go on. Get back to your game. You're not in trouble." The teens murmured their thanks, shooting wary glances at Richards as they jogged back to the court. Kendra faced him again, her voice low and firm. "We're done here. I'm reporting this, and I'll be making sure your captain sees it." Richard's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't keep interfering with my job." Kendra took a step closer. "Your job is to protect and serve, not harass people. And if you can't figure that out, you don't deserve to wear that badge." Richards didn't say another word. He climbed into his squad car and peeled out of the parking lot, tires spitting gravel as he sped off. Kendra watched him go, her mind already racing with the next steps. Later that evening, Kendra sat at her desk, reviewing the day's events. She had already filed a preliminary report about Richards, but something still nagged at her. His hostility, it felt too personal, too targeted. She decided to dig deeper. Something wasn't right. As she scanned through his record, a troubling pattern emerged. Richards had been accused of misconduct multiple times. But somehow, the cases had either been dropped or dismissed. Even more concerning? His name kept appearing alongside other officers flagged in internal affairs investigations, including Sergeant Harris. Kendra's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about one bad cop. This was bigger. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from her colleague, Detective Sean Davis. "You're not going to believe this. Call me ASAP. It's about Richards." Kendra's heart skipped a beat. She already knew this was bad. But how bad? She picked up the phone, steadying her voice. "This is Mills. What's going on?" Sean didn't waste time. "Kendra, I just got a tip from a source in Richards' precinct. He's not just a bad cop, he's part of something bigger. There's a cover-up going on. And Harris is involved." Kendra sat up straighter. "A cover-up for what?" Sean exhaled. "Brutality cases. Complaints against Richards and a couple of other officers have been buried. They've been targeting minorities in certain neighborhoods, and it's been swept under the rug. Every single time." Kendra clenched her jaw. "How far up does this go?" Sean hesitated. "Hard to say. But Harris is definitely protecting him. The complaints don't even make it past his desk. And there's more. Richards has a disciplinary hearing coming up next month, but Harris is already working to make it disappear." Kendra exhaled slowly, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "That explains why Richards was so confident today. He thinks he's untouchable." Sean lowered his voice. "Be careful, Kendra. If you push too hard, they'll come after you." "Let them try," she said, her tone ice cold. "This ends now. I'm not letting Richards or Harris off the hook." "Let me know how I can help," Sean offered. "You just did." Kendra hung up. She sat back in her chair, fingers drumming against the desk. This wasn't just about Richards' behavior today. It was a system. A pattern. A cover-up designed to protect officers who abused their power. And Kendra? She was about to blow it wide open. The next morning, Kendra walked into her office with a singular focus. She gathered her team. "We need concrete evidence," she said, setting down a folder. "Something that directly links Richards and Harris to these cover-ups. Pull complaints, reports, body cam footage, anything we can find. And keep it quiet. I don't want word getting back to their precinct." Her team nodded, already diving into the task. But as Kendra stepped outside for a quick coffee break, a strange feeling settled in her gut. She felt watched. At first, she brushed it off as paranoia. But then, across the street, she spotted it. A black sedan. Parked. Engine running. The driver, a man in plain clothes, was staring directly at her. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away. But he didn't leave. Kendra's instincts flared. This wasn't a coincidence. She kept walking, casual, pretending not to notice. But instead of heading straight back to her office, she took a detour. Ducking into a nearby coffee shop, she found a seat by the window, pulling out her phone. She kept the sedan in her peripheral vision. It didn't move. She tested her suspicion, slipping out the back door and weaving through the alley, emerging on a parallel street. Her heart sank. The sedan had repositioned itself. Parked nearby. Watching. This was real. Someone was tailing her. By the time she got back to her office, Kendra already had a plan forming. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Sean, we need to talk." This was bigger than Richards. bigger than Harris. And now? Now, it was personal. I think they're watching me, Kendra said, her voice low. I need you to dig deeper into Harris's connections. If they're trying to intimidate me, it means I'm on the right track. Sean didn't hesitate. I'm on it. Kendra exhaled, turning her focus back to the case. Hours later, her team uncovered something big. A series of emails. They weren't just any emails, they were between Harris and a city official discussing complaints against Richards. The messages were filled with veiled references to burying reports, suppressing evidence, and coaching Richards on how to navigate disciplinary hearings. Kendra stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. This was it. The proof she needed. She was preparing to escalate the findings when her phone rang again. Sean. His tone was urgent. Kendra, you're not going to believe this. Try me. Richards just filed a formal complaint against you. Kendra's stomach dropped. What? He's accusing you of interfering in an active investigation and threatening him during the park incident. Kendra gritted her teeth. You've got to be kidding me. Harris is backing him up. Her grip on the phone tightened. They're trying to discredit me. It gets worse, Sean continued. They're claiming you abused your authority. If this goes on record, it could stall your case. Maybe even your career. Kendra's mind raced. They were playing dirty. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Let them come. I've got enough evidence to take this higher. They're not going to win. That night, Kendra stayed late at the office, compiling her findings into a detailed, airtight report. She included everything, the emails, the pattern of misconduct, and her first-hand account of what happened with Richards. Tomorrow, she'd take it straight to the chief of police. She was ready. But then, there was a knock at her office door. Lisa, one of her team members, stepped in, holding up a tablet. Her expression was serious. Agent Mills, you need to see this. Kendra took the tablet and pressed play. It was grainy cell phone footage. Someone had recorded the entire park incident. Richards yelling at Marcus. Moving toward him aggressively. Kendra stepping in to de-escalate. Lisa looked at her. This video is going viral. Kendra smiled for the first time all day. Good. This might be the leverage we need. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Her office phone rang again. The chief's assistant. Her tone was grave. Agent Mills, the chief needs to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's about the complaint Richards filed. Kendra sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. The stakes had just been raised. Richards and Harris weren't backing down. But neither was she. The next morning, Kendra walked into the precinct, head held high. She had arrived earlier than usual, her mind laser-focused. When she entered the chief's office, she was met with a stern look from the man behind the desk. And then, her eyes landed on Harris. He was already there. Standing smugly in the corner. Of course he was. The tension in the room was suffocating. The chief motioned for her to sit. Agent Mills, we need to talk. Kendra nodded. Yes, we do. She placed a stack of evidence on the table, ready to turn the tide. But before she could say a word, the door burst open. A uniformed officer rushed in, face pale. Chief, we've got a problem. Richards just detained someone without cause. And it's already making headlines. Silence. The chief's frown deepened. All eyes turned to Kendra. Harris shifted uncomfortably. Kendra leaned back, folding her arms. This is exactly what I've been trying to warn you about. The chief's face darkened as he looked between her and Harris. Agent Mills. Explain. Kendra didn't waste a second. She opened the file she had brought, laying out everything. The emails. The ones proving Harris had been covering for Richards. The complaints. a pattern of racial profiling, abuse of power, and misconduct. The video. The viral footage that was already exposing the truth to the public. She met the chief's gaze. These aren't isolated cases. Officer Richards has been targeting minorities for months, and Sergeant Harris has been protecting him. She turned to Harris. You've created an environment where abuse goes unchecked, where complaints never reach the right people. And now you're trying to cover your tracks by throwing a false complaint at me. Harris opened his mouth to object, but the chief held up a hand. Quiet. His tone was sharp. Final. Kendra pressed on. Meanwhile, Richards is out there, making another unlawful arrest. And let me guess, Harris, were you planning to cover for him again? Harris stayed silent. The chief inhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he turned to Harris. You're dismissed. I'll handle this myself. Harris blinked. Sir, I said you're dismissed. His voice was ice cold. Harris clenched his jaw but had no choice. He turned and walked out, his steps stiff with frustration. Kendra watched him go, knowing this wasn't over. But then, the chief turned back to her. Agent Mills. He leaned forward. You just might have saved this department from itself. She nodded. That was the plan. And just like that, the tide had turned. Kendra confronted the chief, laying out the damning evidence against Richards and Harris. Harris, pale and defensive, tried to downplay the accusations, but a new revelation changed everything. Richards had just detained a city councilman's daughter without cause. The chief, now forced to act, suspended Richards immediately and warned Harris that his time was running out. That afternoon, Kendra's team uncovered body cam footage proving Richards' racial bias. The video went viral, intensifying public outrage. But just as Kendra prepared to push forward, Richards filed a complaint against her, backed by Harris, accusing her of misconduct. It was a desperate attempt to discredit her, but Kendra had solid evidence to clear her name. The next morning, she met with Councilman Rivera, who was furious about his daughter's treatment. He vowed political support, ensuring Richards and his enablers would face justice. As Kendra left the meeting, her team received a crucial tip. Harris was meeting someone off the record. Kendra tracked him to a diner and witnessed him exchanging a thick envelope with a senior officer. Before she could act, Richards appeared at her car, issuing a veiled threat. Unshaken, Kendra and Sean tailed Harris to a hidden office, where they caught him destroying evidence. Confronted with the weight of his crimes, Harris finally broke, admitting to a vast corruption scheme led by real estate mogul Raymond Ellis. Ellis had paid officers to harass and displace residents, then bought their properties at a steal. With Harris's confession, Kendra obtained a federal warrant and led a raid on Ellis' office, uncovering a safe full of incriminating documents. But then, she found a file on herself. Ellis had been tracking her from the start, seeing her as a threat. The media exploded with news of the arrests, and public pressure forced immediate reforms. Richards, Harris, and high-ranking officers were suspended, while Ellis faced federal charges. But Kendra's fight wasn't over. A chilling note left in her car warned her to stop. Her team dug deeper, revealing financial records tying Ellis to police bribes. When confronted, Harris flipped completely, providing a direct link to Ellis. Armed with irrefutable proof, Kendra orchestrated Ellis' downfall. The city erupted in protests, demanding justice, and reforms were finally put into motion. At a community meeting, Marcus, the teen from the park, stood up and said, "Agent Mills showed me that people like me matter." Kendra felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of victory. Weeks later, as Kendra accepted a commendation for her work, she knew the fight for justice was never over. But for now, she had won. And whatever came next, she was ready.